Hi, English students. This is Mrs. Peacock, and at this point, we need to look at the poetry and short story essay. You've read a short story and 5 poems by this point. That's what we focused on the last couple of weeks with our discussion questions. So now you get to analyze that literature. And it does need to be the literature that we've covered in 102 that you write about. So even if you've read a really cool short story or poem in another course, you definitely need to focus on the ones we've covered. The rough draft will be due Wednesday, October 23rd by midnight in the Week 10 module. And that's going to be available for peer review. So it'll literally say poetry and short story peer review, and that's how you'll submit it. The final draft will be due Wednesday, October 30th by midnight in the Week 11 Canvas module titled Submit Your Poetry Short Story Final Draft Here. Cannot get any clearer, right? And this essay is worth 20% of your final grade, so a chunk of the final grade, but not nearly as much as that research paper. Remember, the research paper is worth 40% of your final grade. The length of this essay is quite a bit shorter than that research paper as well. It is only 800 words in length, and that does include your works cited page, or any quotes that you include from the story or poems. For formatting, it's 12-point Times New Roman font, double spaced with MLA heading and style, so that's identical to that research paper. You must have a works cited page with the literary works cited. So say if you write about 3 poems, you would have 3 citations for the poems. But if you write only about the birthmark, you would only have the citation for the birthmark. But, ta-da! The second page has the citations done for you. You're welcome. So you can literally just copy and paste those citations into those works cited pages. So no excuse, right, to not have this works cited page done. Also notice you cannot have any outside sources. I'm going to say that again. You cannot have any outside sources. I want to know what your interpretation of the literature is, not what you found on Sparks Notes or some article you found through Googling. I want to know what you thought about the literature. So to make sure, just do not include outside sources. I know that there's all sorts of things like online of interpretations of this literature. I'd rather know what your interpretations are of it. So whatever poem or story you choose, just make sure it's one that you actually had a pretty strong opinion about and have your own interpretation of. And let me know if you do have any questions about that. Here are some topic ideas you can work with, and it really depends on which work you're focusing on which ones will work. But say if you choose one work, you could choose 3 of the topic ideas. Or if you find one topic idea you want to focus on and you wanted to write about 3 works. But this is still a 5-paragraph essay, so of course those 3 body paragraphs will kind of be determined by what you decide to write about. You could compare and contrast 2 characters. So the main one that has characters within it is the birthmark. So if you wanted to compare and contrast Almer and Aminadab, his assistant, or if you wanted to compare and contrast Almer and Georgiana, you could. They're very different characters, but they do both love each other in different ways. I guess it's arguable if Almer loved Georgiana. But you could focus on ways that they're similar and different. Imagery is when you focus on more so the images that are described in the poem. So Because I Could Not Stop for Death has some really strong imagery. That's one of the main ones I think of. Also, How Do I Love Thee has some imagery, and also My Last Duchess. So those are the same. They all have certain images they play up for the poem. Themes is pretty broad, but it really just depends on which themes stood out to you within the literature. So for instance, for the birthmark, one of the major themes is flaws and imperfections, or our obsession of destroying flaws and imperfections. There's also man versus nature, where Almer tries to take on the natural world as a scientist. So it really just depends on which theme stood out to you as a reader, but if you wanted to pick one work and focus on 3 themes, that would be an easy way to structure this essay. Love is present in a lot of these works, and you could argue almost all of them, except for Because I Could Not Stop for Death doesn't have love in it, but most of these do have a version of love. And so if you wanted to focus on 3 works and how they each depict love differently, that's a really popular topic for this assignment. Or if you wanted to focus on one love poem or love within the birthmark and argue a certain point of view on that, you could. How the author's message is or is not relevant today. Most of these works were from the 1800s, so some of them do not feel as relevant, or some of them could still have messages that are relevant for the modern reader. So it really just depends on your viewpoint on it. But if you choose that, I would recommend maybe doing one work and that being one of your body paragraphs along with 2 other topic ideas for the body paragraph. And that works as a really good third body paragraph because it kind of leads up to today, to a modern audience. How the conclusion is foreshadowed. So foreshadowing is when the author gives hints on how the ending is going to come about. So for instance, not many readers are shocked when Georgiana dies at the end of the birthmark. They literally called it the fatal birthmark. Aylmer has all these failed experiments, so that hints that he's not going to be successful at removing the birthmark. Even his dream about removing the birthmark, and it literally sunk to her heart. So there's so many instances of foreshadowing within the birthmark, so that's the main one that would make a lot of sense with. Settings is just the location of the poem or short story. So if there's a setting that really stood out to you personally, you could focus on that. Symbolism is when an item represents an idea. So for instance, flowers are always symbolic of love, skulls are symbolic of death. So there are a lot of symbols within several of these works. Because I Could Not Stop for Death has symbols for childhood, the children playing at recess, the setting sun is symbolic of the end of the life. Of course, the house and the ground is the grave. So there's a lot of symbols within that poem. There's also some symbols in My Last Duchess as well, the painting itself of the Duchess. The curtain that covers up the painting is like a sign of control. Now the Duke has control over who sees the Duchess. So there's several of these that have symbols within them, but you could focus on the symbols that you've noticed. And then Death in the Afterlife, of course, Because I Could Not Stop for Death has death in the afterlife, but so does the birthmark. And you could argue, How Do I Love Thee as well. It ends with, If God so choose, I shall love thee better after death. And so it ends with this idea that love can become eternal and immortal in a way. So, final draft late submission rules, same as with the research paper. It's 10 points off every day late for that final draft, so just make sure you turn it in on time. And all of your final drafts will be graded using the grading rubric and will be scanned with anti-plagiarism software. So just don't plagiarize and it won't be a problem. I've got a spot for brainstorming and outlining at the bottom for those of you that like to write out your ideas. And don't forget, I've done the citations for you, so there's no reason to just turn in your paper with no citation, right? Pretty easy. But if you do have any questions, please let me know. And don't forget, we have a fantastic writing center as well with tutors who can work with you one-on-one on developing your ideas. And this week's assignment is going to be to submit a topic proposal within discussion. So I'll look over each of your topic proposals and give you feedback on if you're in the right trajectory, or if you need some extra guidance on getting back on track. So let me know if you have any questions, and have a wonderful day.